before they found an airplane to fly down and pick us up. But that finished off the tour. Not too long after that, nothing untoward happened. And sent to conversion unit to convert onto 4-engine aircraft. The aircraft were Halifax 5s, I think they were, Merlin engines. They'd been around the mill somewhat, but we picked up our flight engineer there and learned how to work as a team in handling this aircraft. The hardest thing to handling it was learning how to taxi it. They had air brakes, differential braking on the rudder bar, and it was so easy to over control. Initially, you were doing the taxiing back and forth, zigzag. That was the hardest part, learning how to fly the darn stupid thing. But it's good training, but we had a lot of engine shutdowns and problems with the aircraft that were available. When we got shipped out of there to our squadron, it was a real pleasure. I had brand new Halifax 3 Hercules engines, bags of power, and they were a real pleasure to fly. Now, I can't compare it. I've had talked to people who flew both Halifaxes and the Lancaster, and they like the handling of the Lancaster better than the Halifax. I can't argue with it. I had no fault to find in the Halifax. So, general rule in the station, you got in there as a new crew. The pilot did 2 second dicky trips, stand beside an experienced pilot, somebody pretty well tour expired. So you went out on 2 trips with him, and then you took your own crew. You're on your own after that. I learned a few tricks. One fella, I remember we were going in on a daylight target. It wasn't too deep. I have to look back in my logbook. But I remember we were coming under some fire. A flak seemed to have us bracketed. He just shoved the nose of the aircraft down, slid over underneath another one coming in, and pulled up on the other side. Now, I don't know if that was dirty pool or not, but it was survival. He was finishing his tour, and he wanted to make sure he finished it. All's fair game. Anyway, the actual operations, mostly they were relatively uneventful. You always saw aircraft blowing up around you. Sometimes it looked like you get out and walk on the flak, but it's a lot of space out there, and pyrotechnics make a big show. I know they tried to tell us that these aircraft I saw blowing up with it, well, they were dummies. The Germans were sending up to try and spook you. Well, we soon learned whether they were spooks or whether they were for real. I'm trying to think of incidents that happened. I remember watching one aircraft coming in right over the target, and he was coned in searchlights. When I picked him up, he was on his back heading the other direction, like the top of the loop. I doubt very much he ever recovered from it. But it was getting coned on the searchlights from about 3 angles. It was very disorienting, I think is the word I'm trying. It was something you had to fight to overcome, and that's why searchlights were used. And also, if they get somebody caught in the searchlights, it's something the fighters can zero in on. So it was something to be avoided at all times, if at all possible. I remember one night we had little flak damage. It must have knocked the electrical circuits out somewhere, because my navigator had nothing left he could work with down where his position. So I finally said to him, well, Mac, you might as well come up top here and see what this war is all about. You haven't seen anything down below there. You find out they really are shooting at us. At the time they shot at us, so we didn't see anything coming, going in on a early evening raid on a V-bomb site. There's not a lot of aircraft, 15 or 20. There was no sign of any resistance whatsoever. And the first predicted shell that came up just about knocked us out of the sky. We were on our bombing run. We finished the bombing run, and everything seemed to be working more or less. Got ourselves back home. We taxied in. Oil was spilling everywhere. Well, what it was, they'd hold the oil tank, the oil reservoir, the one for each side of the aircraft, nestled in between the motors. And this one had been penetrated all right, but it was not right through the bottom. And it wasn't until I landed in the aircraft in the tail down position, the last of that oil ran out. So I could have lost both engines, but fortunately we didn't. The aircraft had a fair amount of work before it was going to fly again. There were always things cropped up, like I mentioned bad weather for landing. I was diverted the first trip I did on our own. We couldn't get back to our base. We had to go to a small base up just south of Edinburgh. It was a night fighter, OTU. And the outer circles guiding around were a lot tighter than the Halifax, or the heavy bombers. And I started following around that, and I said, whoa, what's going on here? I gotta fly this thing like it's a fighter, because you couldn't see. They didn't turn the runway lights on. They had the outer circle. They give you runway lights just at the last minute, but you had to be within the confines of that circle. But that was a learning experience. They were always learning experiences. Something new happened. And we got through that all right. The only other thing that sticks out in my mind is, again, a landing. It was a new crew, experienced pilot, as it turned out, but new ops. A fellow up there, we all arrived back, within a few minutes of each other. And he'd had 2 goes at trying to get in, and the weather had forced him to overshoot and try again. Finally, this voice comes on the RT, calling him out by his aircraft number. I forgot what that was, but he says, "Get out of there and let a man land that can land." So he got out of there, went to another base. The guy that can land landed all right and overshot and rode off the aircraft. So I don't know what happened to him. I was just about ready to leave myself. So we finished our tour. Oh, yes. I must remember we did have a visit, the King and Queen. And I think there was an investiture went on not involved anybody in my squadron or flight. But also a tour of we were all lined up in our crew room, and the King and Queen came through with Princess Elizabeth, about a 16, 17-year-old, sort of standing in the center watching proceedings. The King embarked on a discussion with me about gremlins. Did I see any of them? Used to talk about gremlins being in aircraft. Some nonsensical. I saw it quoted in the paper after somebody that knew more about it than I did. But they were very friendly, shook hands, and made you feel at ease flying the flag. But that was about it on the squadron. We got finished after going away for a week's leave, come back. What do you want to do? Well, what are my choices? Well, you can go back as an instructor at an OTU if you want. I said, well, I've done my tour of instructing. I'm not particularly anxious to do that again. He said, well, how do you like this? I need 2 people to go down, check on some of the stations we have in the southwest of England. Liaison work, primarily, because there are a lot of Canadian aircrew and these bases wanting to know what's going to happen. Why aren't they getting somewhere? So I had no answers, but I was working out of Exeter District Headquarters, and I took their problems back to headquarters. Mostly, they were starting to backlog on aircrew. They weren't losing as many as they did, so the replacement rates had dropped somewhat. And I suppose they were getting people lined up to go to Japan ultimately. This was, when I finished off, well, this would be September of 44. There was a lot of bombing went on yet after that, but they had forces in place. It had kept building and building. I don't know all the answers, or maybe none of them, but I know they had a lot of aircrew who wanted to get going that were stalled at these stations, and it was my job to try and smooth them out and say, your turn will come. From there, I said, then what do you want to do? Well, we'll find a position for you, or you can go home if you want. I thought, well, who am I to fight destiny? I said, well, I might as well go home. So after due course, we shipped up to Worthington. Anyway, it's on the west coast of England there, where we sailed out of. And on the Ile de France, had a rough trip going home, weather-wise, and a lot of people seasick. But we got home, got on the train at Halifax, no wasting around, headed up. My sister and her husband were standing at the railway station. As we come in off the train, this is in Toronto. I said, where is it? Where is it? I said, what are you talking about? Your decoration. I don't know anything about that. It come out in the London Gazette after I'd left England, and they had it reprinted in the Globe and Mail, I suppose. But I never saw it really till the investiture. Oh gosh, 2 or 3 years later, done by the Lieutenant Governor in Hamilton. A number of number of local people were invested at the same time.
This is the DFC?
Yeah.
Didn't mention it.
No.
What's your crew? This,
Okay.
that's the one that you're very interested in.
We've got just under 10 minutes left, so,
Okay.
so yeah.
Okay.
This is what
Do you want
wanted
to talk
say.
about the DFC and your feelings about that, your crew?
Well, I no different than a lot of people in the same situation. Figured that it's too bad it can't be pinned in all the crew, but I guess it's the same in any business or military situation. The leader gets the blame and the leader gets the plaudits. And I guess that's the way it worked out. But you don't achieve that without a good working crew that have done their job well. Everybody contributed.
How many ops did you do?
Oh, I have to look back.
39.
The numbers varied for everybody as they were on a point system. 4 points for a major target. A major target running over 6-7 hours. And 3 points for lesser targets. So that point system had to work up to 120, I think it was. I didn't do the calculations. They said, you've had it. Other than my 2 gunners, you didn't have the points because none of the crew did. They were working on my points. And because they still had spare points to use up, they had to do 2 more trips, somebody else.
You had a reference about D-Day.
Just take the card too there.
Yeah. About D-Day.
Oh, well, D-Day, it was a maximum effort. And we were instructed, we were briefed that there would be 1,000 bombers sent out in groups of 200 per target. The selected targets inland from the landing area. And for any reason, we didn't drop our bombs. We couldn't jettison them in the channel because all our fleet troops were down there. So as it turned, when you followed the instructions of the master bomber, and each group had about 20 minutes there to get the group over. Well, we had about 14 minutes into the 20 minutes, and they called up. And the master bomber called in and said, well, the target is eliminated. We're not dropping any more markers. Do as you're instructed, which meant I got to either go over into the Irish Sea and get rid of my bombs, or if I had enough fuel, take them home. So after a bit of calculating, we decided we had enough fuel to go home, and that's what we did. Not much but vapor left in the tanks we got there, but nobody was running for cover. And that was about it. It was the week following, I just checked in my logbook. We did six raids in 6 nights. And they finally got us day off. And I remember only time I ever told somebody they're crazy. As a crew, we were pretty whacked out. So we finally got a day off. And some guy decided we're supposed to do so many practice bombing trips or something. I said, you got to be kidding. Well, that's the way it is. I said, just a minute. I went in to see the CO and had a few words, and that was the end of that. It was just plain silliness. But that's the only comment I made. I've got a home in one piece.
You mentioned that when you were on a bombing run, you only had 30 seconds
Oh,
over the target?
every briefing, every crew navigator was given a time he was supposed to bomb and over target, and he was supposed to be within 30 seconds either way, over or under. It sounds ridiculous, but I think that's why the American chap I talked to about, I mentioned earlier, he didn't want my job and I didn't want his. The idea of having to be up there all by yourself and be that exact, he didn't understand that. I knew they couldn't be that accurate because it all relied on one aircraft and they're spread all over, so who knows. I think I've covered the main points. I don't,
You've kept in contact with your crews?
oh yeah, Mac, I always had, my navigator, I always had contact with him. I lost contact with my gunners and the bomb aimer and the flight engineer. Well, the flight engineer was RAF. He found me at one of the reunions over either 6th Group or 427, I guess, up in Liming. He showed up. Just felt that I would be there, yet I wasn't registered because they'd made a mistake on the bookwork. But he found somebody else, a mutual acquaintance, and asked him if he knew I was around. On that, I was pointed out to him. He come up there, "Are you Murray Marshall?" "Well, this is my RAF flight engineer. Learned how to speak English. He's from Scotland, Greenock, or not, Glasgow." And he'd done very well by himself in the aircraft industry, where he made his money. The other, my bomb aimer, I found him at one of the Winnipeg reunions that was held. His name was in the book, and we got together. So I've visited with all these people since and had them over to Canada, and haven't visited them in their own homes, but had an invitation to do so. And my one gunner I found through my bomb aimer. And the funny part, all the years that I lived just north of Burlington, he had a job with Hoover vacuum cleaner. And he says at least once or twice a year he was down to head office within stone's throw of my place. However, we visited him and his wife twice now. So it's sort of rewarding. We got split up so quickly after the tour in different directions that the thread was broken. Anything else you can think I didn't say?
Well, you had a long association here with Mount Hope, didn't you?
Yes, I haven't even attempted to cover that.
We're just about done anyway.
Yeah.
17 years.
17 years, we won't tackle it.
Not unless you can do it in 17 seconds.
No.
That's it, we're done, the date just quit, so that's good timing.